Welcome to Postpartum Unfiltered.
The podcast where we get real about what happens during the postpartum period.
I am Jillian,
And I'm Sara.
and we are two doctor moms who were not prepared for what postpartum would bring.
By sharing your stories, we hope to spread awareness and allow other families to be more prepared for the time after birth.
And welcome. Today we're going to do something a little bit different. I am going to have Sara from episodes 9 and 10 interview me about my second postpartum experience. So, Sara, thank you for being here.
Thank you for letting me be here. This is going to be a cool experience to kind of be on the other side.
I know.
And I can't wait to hear all about your experience. I'm pretty excited. So, what about your birth and overall experience do you think you would want to talk about today or kind of give some information about?
So with my birth, so with my second son, my kids are 20 months apart. So I was just over a year when I found out I was pregnant. And my son was almost a year old when I found out I was pregnant with my second son. I think like 5 days before his birthday is when we found out. And
Did you plan it that way or?
yeah, we were trying to have them close together. We were kind of we were. I mean, we started trying a couple months before that. I think it took about 3 months for us to get pregnant, which sounds insane in retrospect that we were even trying like before 20 months. But
I know I'm like, so is this a plan or?
yeah, like we were like, yeah, let's have them that close together. That sounds genius. My older brother and I are 18 months apart, and my husband's brothers are so much older than him that he was like,
Yeah.
I was almost like an only child, so let's have them close together. That sounds fun. And I was like, yeah, sounds fun.
Some people like it. They're like, I want my kids to be in diapers at the same time and get out at the same time. So some people actually,
Yeah, well, I will say my younger one is almost 2 now, and I'm very excited to be done with diapers at whatever point that decides to happen. But yeah, so his birth was a lot different than my first one. I got induced with him on my due date. I didn't go into any spontaneous labor, and that was fine. So I got an epidural also because I had to get Pitocin for my first
Mhm.
one, and I was like, I had already heard that Pitocin contractions were terrible, and then with my first son, they were terrible. So I was like, no, thank you. We will.
They were right.
We are going to numb that out. Um, and as I was progressing, in certain positions, I couldn't feel the effect of the epidural anymore. So they kept calling anesthesia and coming in and being like, we're just going to push more medication. And I was like, okay, I'm not a giant person. Like, are we okay? Is this enough? I mean, it happened like 5 times. They came in and they just kept giving me more.
The thing when mine didn't work, they were like, we can take it out and like put it back in. And when I was getting my epidural, my husband was on the other side. He's like, oh my God, the needle's so big. Oh my God, do you feel it? It's going into your spine. I'm
That's
like,
not
please
helpful.
stop talking. And I remember the nurse was like, you can leave because
Yeah.
you're very nervous. So when they were like, we can take it out and put it back in, I was like, I don't really trust you if you didn't get it right the first time.
Is there a different person here now or?
Someone else, when you guys like switch shifts, that'd be
Yeah.
great.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and I had some issues the first time with my epidural, so I was like not totally surprised that I had issues
Right.
the second time, but um yeah, it's not great because like also with my experience with Pitocin is like uh you end up feeling almost constant contraction instead of the ebbing and flowing that you would feel if you were in spontaneous labor.
Mm.
So it's very unpleasant when your epidural stops working and you have Pitocin.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
yeah, that's true. I got induced with the second one, so like I totally agree with that.
yeah. And and when they told me it's time to push, I didn't believe them because the first time I could feel my son's head like slamming into my pubic bone. And so I was like, yeah, he's definitely ready to go. And I couldn't feel that the second time. So I thought like, great, I'm going to be one of those people that pushes for 25 hours and like can't get this baby out because they're telling me to push too early. Um, but I got him out in 2 contractions. Um, so I had another
Oh
second,
wow.
yeah, which was good because he wasn't breathing. And so he ended up
Oh my
being, yeah, his whole thing. I told you the birth story could be its whole own thing. So we're gonna just like skip some
side
parts,
note,
give
side
you
note, yeah.
just like a few of the highlights that lead into
Real
the
quick, wasn't
postpartum
breathing, two
experience. Yeah,
pushes. Great.
yeah, just quiet side note.
Oh
Um,
my God.
so he had to go to the NICU.
Oh.
And like it was all chaos. I like, they have they have the baby off to my right, and I look over at my husband on my left, and he's just like staring. He doesn't know where to look. And then I look down, and there's two people in between my legs with blood up to their forearms, and I'm like, none of this seems to be going well.
Oh
Um,
my goodness.
um, yeah, they ended up having to manually extract my placenta. The umbilical cord broke, so they couldn't get it out. So that's how they got up to their forearms in blood. It was because they had their forearms inside my body. So
Oh my
that happened.
gosh.
Yeah,
They definitely had to make sure they took everything out.
four
They don't want to.
forearms.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
I still can't believe you went to the 6 week post-op after that. I'd be like, I'm done,
It's
actually.
fine. Yeah, he's just, it's closed for business, actually.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
The
Sorry.
building is condemned.
My goodness.
Yeah, and so then like in all the midst of that chaos, these two, one was a midwife, one was an OB resident. They look up, and the NICU people are taking our son out of the room, and they're like to my husband across the room, "Do you want to come with the baby?" And he's looking at me like, "Are you bleeding out? Should I go with the baby? Are you gonna
Who
die?
do
I don't
I
know what to do."
choose?
Yeah, and I was like,
Don't want to
"Ah."
make the wrong choice.
Yeah, I was like, I'll be fine, I think. Go with the baby. Because I also didn't know where the NICU was. So I was like, go figure out where our child is.
Yeah, no, that's so true. When my son was born, I remember my husband was standing right next to me and he was like crying. And I was like, go follow the baby. Like right now, that is not helping at
Yeah.
all.
Yeah.
Because I started bleeding, and I remember the OB kept trying to search like where I was bleeding from, and like
Oh,
it just
good.
kept happening. And I was like, oh my God, this is kind of like what my biggest fear was.
Yeah.
She eventually found it because my son had when the shoulder gets stuck in the canal, I forgot the word.
Dystocia.
Dystocia, yeah. So he
Yeah.
had and I think that he lacerated something on the way out.
Oof.
That's what it sounded like. But you definitely took the cake.
It happens. It happens.
That was a lot.
Yeah. So that's the highlights. Um, so the baby was in the NICU, and they finish up with me. They leave, and I'm sitting there, and I don't know if you ever got any labor shakes. Both times I had my labor shakes afterwards. So it's like you're kind of sitting there almost convulsing, and I was actually cold. But I knew I wasn't like I wasn't really shivering. I was just having labor shakes, but I was cold. Because they had pushed the epidural so much, I couldn't move my legs. I couldn't feel them. I couldn't move them. And the blanket was like off on the couch next to my bed. And it was like a step away from the bed. And I had to call the nurse, like, "Hi, can you hand me that blanket? That's right there." I know it looks like I could reach it, but I cannot.
So did you have the labor shakes the first time?
I did. And again, it was like, I don't know, 20 minutes after I gave birth and was all done. And the
Okay.
first time I was like really freaked out. I didn't know what they were. And I was like, am I having a seizure? But I seem really coherent, so I don't really know what this is.
Not what I read about.
Yeah. Yeah, and then I looked it up afterwards, and most people have them while they're in labor, not afterwards, but whatever. To each their own, I guess.
Yeah.
Um,
Be scared too if that happened to me the first time.
but yeah, and it was the second birth was funny too, because my husband, like, he also was weeping at the sight
Okay.
of our child, but that happened to him the first time, and he was like, I just wasn't expecting it. I was so overwhelmed with like this love and connection that I just like, my eyes became faucets. And so the second time he was like, I'm prepared. I totally know. Like, I know that I'm going to have that feeling, so I'm not going to cry. And it didn't work out that way. He was also waterworks. Yeah, adorable.
Oh, that is actually
Um,
really cute.
yeah, and I felt the same way the second time as I did the first time. Like, I didn't feel an instant connection. I felt very like disconnected. It felt very like a mindful practice. They tell you like just observe the events and don't connect emotion to them. And that's kind of how I felt. Like all this crazy stuff was happening, and I was just like, oh, that's happening. Oh, this is happening. None of this seems good, but it's all happening.
Yeah.
And so then like I got my blanket, and I was alone in the room. I didn't know what was going on with the baby. I didn't know where my husband was. And there's still COVID protocols in the hospitals. So like, yeah,
Oh,
I didn't even know if he had his phone on him. I didn't know if the phone would be allowed in the NICU because, the
right.
babies are in there. Um, I was just like, okay, I'll just chill here and wait. And then my husband came back, and they said like, they got the baby breathing before he left the room. So they were like, he's stable, but we're going to take him to the NICU. So I like at least knew that he was probably fine. Um, and when my husband came back, he was like, yeah, like I went in there, I watched him for a little bit. They said only one person can go in at a time. And then the nurse came in and told me, like, you can't go until you can walk over there. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, I can't walk right now. Um, and and then it had been a while and I still couldn't feel my legs. And then a different nurse came in with a wheelchair and was like, we're going to take you over there.
I love that nurse.
Yeah. And I was like, cool, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. So, and it actually was like nice that because they let my husband wheel me in so we could go in together because I couldn't walk. Whereas if I was walking, only one of us would have been able to go in at a time.
Right.
Um, it was kind of overwhelming. I mean, my baby was like hooked up to all these machines. He had tubes coming out of his throat. He had things all strapped to his face. And it was just like, oh, hi, baby. Like, this looks very not good for you, but
How long was he in
you're
there for?
chill. He was only in there for 25 hours. So his vitals and everything stabilized, and they had him on a CPAP to assist with breathing. And when they decided to take him off of that, they said that he needed to be off of it for at least 12 hours without getting worse before they would let him come back into our room. And that's once they took him off, he did fine. So we just had to wait that 12 hours to make sure he would be okay. Um, so we got the next day he was able to come into the room with us. But it was kind of like that first night we were kind of like twiddling our thumbs, like, well, what do we do now?
Yeah.
There's no baby in here. There's no whatever. I can't walk.
That's
They came in to check me, and they like palpate your abdomen, and they were like,
oh yeah.
"Oh, your uterus is all the way to the left side." And I was like, "That's interesting. That's not where it lives." And they said, "It means your bladder's full." And I was like, "Oh, that's also interesting because I cannot feel that at all."
Oh my gosh, that happened to me the first time. I couldn't pee. They were like, "Can
Yeah.
you pee?" I'm like, "I'm pushing as hard as I can. Nothing is happening." They're like, "We're gonna put a catheter in." I'm like, "Oh, what?"
Yeah, they asked me like, "Do you want to get up and go to the bathroom?" And I was like, "Bro, I can barely feel my legs. Like
I
I
can't.
I don't think that's smart for me to try to walk to the bathroom, even though it was in my room." And so they put a catheter back in. And that
Oh,
was actually really annoying because then after I got my feeling back in my legs, they refused to take it out until I was discharged. So
what?
I had it in for like 2 days. Yeah.
Oh, that thing is so annoying.
Yeah, well, it was also super annoying because then when they finally went to take it out, they couldn't get the balloon to deflate, so they were yanking on it, and I could feel it like pulling out of my body. And I have prolapse, and I'm almost positive it's because they yanked my bladder out of my pelvic floor. So
Oh
good
my
luck, good luck,
gosh.
everybody.
Good luck. So that
Yeah.
happened with your pelvic floor. So what did you kind of do to like, I guess, take care of kind of your pelvic floor and get it strengthened and all of that?
Well, I had the second degree tear again, so like with that, I
Okay.
kind of knew what to expect. I don't know, like the first week, so you like they give you the peri bottle, you don't wipe, whatever, everything's super tender. You just gave birth to. Oh, my second son also had a huge head, not quite as big as his brother. He was only 99th percentile,
Oh,
head circumference. And he was almost 8 pounds, and he came out and they were like, "Oh my God, this baby's huge." And I remember thinking he looks so small. He was so much smaller than my first son.
oh my God. I guess it's all relative if you
Yeah.
think about it. It's true.
Yeah. And then they had the audacity to say, like, "Oh yeah, I guess a lot of our moms have been giving birth around like 38, 37, 38 weeks." And I was like, "Oh, have they? They didn't go over their due date? Shut up."
I hate everyone's like, "Oh, your second one, they'll come faster." No, they both came around the same time, 40 weeks. It was like crazy to me.
Yeah, well, I looked that up because I was excited about that. But what I found was that your labor time tends to be shorter, but your gestation time tends to be similar. So, like,
Oh, wonderful.
yeah, so I was 40 plus 5 and 40 plus 1. So, which was
Makes
funny
sense.
too, because I got induced on my due date. And my husband was like, "We're having a baby today." And I was like, "We're almost definitely not having a baby today."
But I felt like this time since I was getting induced, the only positive was like I shaved my legs, I was ready to go. I had my bag packed. The first time it was like totally a surprise and I was not ready. And I remember I kept
Uh,
like apologizing to the OB. I was like, "I'm so sorry, I didn't shave my legs."
Well, I was like, fuck it, you guys got to deal with that.
No, I was talking to my OB. She's like, we had one OB that used to go around and would just take the hair down there and
What?
just swell it up and just take scissors, just do a nice cut for all the women. I'm like, what?
Why?
Yeah, I don't know. I
Do
don't know.
people
You just
want
like
that?
swirl that up and just
There's
the
too much.
barber.
There's too much happening. I don't. I don't need
I'm
scaping.
like,
Also, I don't need
can he bill for
landscaping.
that? Is that
Yeah,
a
right. So
billable
you
thing?
look at
Is
your
that why he's
charges,
doing it?
other services, probably more than a regular haircut.
Was
Uh,
that sterile scissors? Was that like in his pocket? He went from room to room.
yeah,
Like, what's happening?
yeah. They just, they put them in the autoclave. It's fine.
I'm like, my OB gave me a lot of information that had nothing to do with my pregnancy. So that was one of the pieces of information she gave me.
Nice, nice, super helpful. But yeah, so I had the second degree tear. I was like, okay, so then like a week later, I was doing my normal like peri care. They gave me a sitz bath. The thing they gave me to put in the toilet to like do the sitz bath, they said just like put this in your toilet and put hot water in it and then like sit on the toilet seat. But it didn't fit in my toilet right. So like I couldn't really like sit on the toilet seat while it was in there. So I abandoned that fairly quickly. I did the peri bottle. I did the Tux pads, the witch hazel pads were the thing that always felt the best for me. So I did that. Um, I did ice while I was in the hospital, the big like ice pack pads. Those are
Mm.
genius. And then I switched to heat when I got home because I wanted to like help support healing instead of just like delaying inflammation so that it wasn't healing. But then like a week into it, I was peeing one time and it was on fire. Like my perineum was on fire. It didn't feel like a UTI or anything like from the like peeing itself, but I was like, and so I looked at it and I was like, oh, that looks like it has opened. So like my stitches started to tear apart just a little bit. So I went in, actually this visit was really funny. I went in for at like 4.5 weeks before
Yeah.
my 6 week appointment because I was like, something's going on with my stitches. It hurts. And they looked at it and they're like, oh, it's mostly okay. But I was in the room and when I was in the hospital, they had trouble placing my IV the first time. So they had to like take it out and do it again. And then um
Happened with me.
yeah, then they were putting fluids through my IV and I looked down and my whole forearm got swollen and I was like, oh, something's wrong. They were like,
This is not the right place. I
yeah,
gotta
they were
pop
like,
my arm over
yeah,
here.
like it had been fine for several hours and then it wasn't fine. And they're like, oh, okay, we're going to take that out because it's no longer going in your veins. And then the same nurse that had trouble the first time was back on duty. And so like she tried again and like she was very nice though. She was like, do you want me to get somebody else? And I said, yeah, we don't seem compatible for this procedure. Um, and so she got some, but anyway, I had been stuck four times in my forearms and my veins looked obliterated. Like my one where the fluid started filling up in my forearm, my vein was black. Like it looked like a black Y on my forearm because it had like torn up my vein. And so like you had this like black Y impression of a vein. It was all like yellow and bruised because it was a week from when it happened. My other arm was also like green and purple. And the doctor is like examining my pelvic floor and he looks up at me and he's like, is everything okay at home? And like, what's going on with your forearms? And it was funny too because my husband was in the room with me. He
Like, I
and the
feel like you
baby
should
were
ask.
there. Yeah, and I was like, oh, you should see my other arm. He's like looking at me all concerned, and I'm like, they had a really hard time with my IV, and then once he saw the black Y on my arm that once was my vein, he was like, oh, okay, yeah, that tracks. Um,
Yeah. But I feel like he should have asked you without your husband in the room.
I know they never
Really
I think the
concerned.
first time they asked me like if I was safe at home and my husband was in the room and I was like, yeah, but also what am I gonna say right now? I like
Like if
you
I say
should
no, I'm definitely not
yeah,
safe
like
after this.
yeah, you should know better than to do this like this. But anyhow,
When do you guys have your training? It's every
yeah.
6 months. I think you get some
Yeah.
sort of training in this
I
office.
have some
Yeah.
feedback. Um,
Hope you guys know how to deal with the domestic violence
yeah.
victims.
And so yeah, and then I started to like once I started healing more and like the swelling went down, I started to suspect prolapse. And so at my 6-week appointment, I went in and I said, hey, like, yeah, I came in because my stitches like separated a little bit, but that seems healed. But I think I have prolapse and, like these are my symptoms. And the OB said it was a male OB that I had never seen before, that was in the practice. And he looked at me and he said, do you want me to examine you? And I was like, bro, what kind of answer is that?
What
Like, what are you saying right now? Do I want you up in my lady bits? Like, not really, but I just told you all this stuff that's going on. So, like, maybe you should look at it.
are you psychic? Do you have like X-ray vision that you don't need to examine me? Because
Yeah.
that's pretty cool.
Yeah. So I was like, all
If
right,
not,
that's,
then yeah, bro.
yeah. I was like, okay, that's fine. That's okay.
You
So he
want me to do my
did.
job? I
Yeah.
do.
So he did. And he was like, yeah, you got a prolapse. And I was like, great talk. Um, So he was like, "Oh, we can send you to pelvic floor." Like he said, like it might get better, it might not get better. Like you could do something about it if you want to. And I was like, "All right, I'm gonna go talk to somebody else." Uh,
That's what is
and
happening.
I ended up getting pelvic floor PT, and that really helped a lot. So it helped with a lot of my symptoms. My prolapse, like visually, is a little bit better, but I don't have the symptoms of it really anymore.
Oh,
So
that's great.
that's cool. But I do have to like keep up with pelvic floor rehab. My son's almost 2 years old, and I still like if I'm slacking on some of my pelvic floor rehab, then I start to have some issues. So I'm like, okay, well, these kids, they just come tearing out of you, literally.
That's when people are
But
like, do you want a third one? I'm joking.
yeah, no, I'm cool. I'm totally cool. Yeah. People
Exactly.
keep asking that, and I'm like, no, first of all, no. Second of all, absolutely not.
Oh my gosh. Well, I wanted to ask between your first and second, as far as like breastfeeding, was it kind of like the same experience for you? Was it different?
Oh,
Oh
it was kind of similar, but so my first time in the hospital, I had like no idea what to expect, right? And like the lactation consultant came and said like, "Oh yeah, yeah, everything's going well," and I kept thinking, "I don't think anything's happening." And the second time, I felt no different again, and I was like, "Okay, now this time I know that I don't have any milk." Um, my son was born over a holiday weekend, so there was no lactation consultant there. Um, so I didn't get to see one in the hospital. And it was also during the formula shortage. So okay, so number one, he was in the NICU. So like he got formula immediately in the NICU because I wasn't there and he was in the NICU. Um,
Right.
and when I saw him the first time, they were like, you can try to breastfeed. And so I did. I would go see him a couple of times and try and see if like he would stimulate any milk production or anything or colostrum or anything. And I still felt like I don't think anything's happening. So when we got him in the room, they brought me the hospital pump again, but I had already known that the standard flanges are too big, so like it's very uncomfortable for me to try to use the hospital pump because the suction's even stronger and the flanges didn't fit. So I did try it to stimulate milk flow, but it was too painful and I was like, whatever. My milk came in like 5 days later, last time, so I'm not going to stress about it. It'll come in when it comes in. And when I had my first son, they would bring us the little like pre-made formula bottles and they would say, use it. And then whatever you don't use, if you don't use it within an hour, throw it out. And this time, because of the formula shortage, they were like doling out our formula and keeping it out of our room, like in their fridge so that we didn't like waste it.
Yeah.
Um, and I remember we had this one nurse who was a man who like our baby was sleeping and he had been sleeping a lot and it had been, I don't know, like 3 or 4 hours since he had eaten and he was knocked out asleep. And this male nurse made a big deal about like, you have to wake him up and feed him. And I was kind of like, he's going to be fine. Like our first son did the same thing. He slept so much like the first couple of days and he ate and was fine. Um, so he spent like 15 minutes waking our son up and then was like, oh, you need to feed him. And I said, well, we need our formula. And he said, there's a formula shortage. And I said, you just told me how important it was to feed this baby. And I am not making any milk right now. So could you go get our formula? And then he also tried to ask me if I had tried hand expressing And I was like, I don't have any milk in my breasts. And he was
Oh
asking
God,
me like what
sir.
technique I was using. And I was like, I finally told him, look, I'm not making any milk and I'm not interested in discussing this topic any further with you. And he was like, oh, okay.
Yeah, get out of here.
Yeah.
Get out of here. Well, with my son, like they're like, what do you want to do? I was like, well, I want to do breastfeeding. Well, in the first couple days we were in the hospital, they didn't give us any formula and I wasn't producing anything. They were like, oh,
Yeah.
he has like his own brown fat, he'll be fine. So when I went to his first doctor's appointment, when you go like 3, 4 days, whatever, I think it's
Yeah.
he had like these crystals in his diaper. I'm like, what the heck is that? They're like, oh, he's dehydrated. I'm
Oh,
like,
good.
what? I'm like, why did anybody offer formula at that time?
Yeah.
Like, oh,
And
I
that's it. Yeah. I mean, I think it's a weird balance where like of them trying to like support breastfeeding without stressing you, like and allow you to like get your flow and figure it out and whatever. But I was like, I have nothing. I have nothing to give from my body to him right now. And so we actually, because of the formula shortage, we actually had to buy formula from the UK.
okay.
So we had gotten formula ahead of time because we knew that my milk didn't come in the first time. So we wanted to make sure we had some for when we came home. Um, and my milk came in about 4 or 5 days later, again, like hard and fast. Oh God, it's so painful when it comes in. And again, I had one super producer side. So like I had one like normal to slightly above normal producing side and one side that was making twice as much as that other side. So like when I would pump one session, I would get like 4 to 5 ounces out of one side and twice that out of the other side. And
Amazing.
yeah, it was wild. And the letdown was super strong on that side. So they were always like trying to drink from that side. So I would usually start them on the weaker side and do like the haka to catch some of the letdown to like get some of the pressure off of that side. Or I would even pump a little to get some of the like milk out of the super producer so it wouldn't come shooting out so hard. Um, and I mean, I had the same struggles. I had like we latched better. My second son had a less difficult time latching and seemed to be feeding easier, but like it was stressful. And I always felt like, well, how do we know how much he's getting? And like if enough is coming out, blah, 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 blah. So um, we started doing bottles of breast milk during the day. And then we would switch. I started just breastfeeding him directly at night because it was easier than like heating up a pumped milk and then having to pump while after he slept, like I was doing that the first time because I was exclusively pumping and it was brutal. Um, so that worked pretty well, and I knew I wanted to stop when I went back to work. I was going to take 3 months off and I was like, I don't want to pump at work. Like that was a disaster last time. I hate pumping and I just like, that's when I'm going to stop. Like it's better for me and my mental health. And since I'm producing so much milk,
Yeah.
I had over 300 ounces in the freezer, like at any given
Wow.
time, basically. And so I was like, we'll have some where he can have some every day for a couple months. And then right before 3 months, we got thrush. It was fucking terrible. So
Oh my God.
yeah, I was worried about mastitis this whole time, and thrush snuck right up on me. It was awful. It like, I don't know if you've had it or know anybody who's had it, but like you feel bad because you look at your kid and their like tongue is coated in white yeast, and then it feels like hot like boiling acid coming out of your breast. You can feel it moving. You can feel the milk flow through the ducts and come out of your nipple. And then your nipples sting for like an hour after you feed.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's terrible.
I did not know about this.
Yeah,
Oh
it's terrible.
my
I
God.
10 out of 10 do not recommend getting thrush.
God.
So then I
How
was
long does
like,
that last?
I mean, it can last a while. It's a yeast infection, right? So like you treat it. They gave us like an antifungal thing that I had to like put on a cotton swab and like rub inside his mouth every time he fed and then rub it on my nipples every time. And then like you're supposed to try to keep your breast dry, which like you feel all basically they're like just be topless all the time and I'm like no. uh so, So I would like set a timer to like try to air dry my nipples after feeding, and it was a disaster. But then when that cleared up, I was like, now we're done. But that was right around 3 months.
So, oh, okay. Okay. Yeah. I've heard like back to like the pumping at work. Like I have a friend who was trying to put in pump brakes and it was really hard for her. She ended up having to just stop because
Yeah.
they wouldn't put in pump brakes for her. Even though I think they are legally supposed to, they made it really hard for her to have pump brakes.
Yeah.
So that was
It's
like, yeah.
yeah, and that happened to me the first time too. I was working at a different place that would have been way more supportive, but it is hard like when you're trying to see patients and then like they're coming in whenever they're coming in and like you need to pump at your regular interval, but also in case like you have a clog or you're uncomfortable or whatever and you want to pump. And I had switched, I never used an electric pump with my second son because it was so uncomfortable. I got a hand pump and I found like me controlling the pumping and the pressure worked a lot better for me. So I'm sure I didn't get as much milk out, but like I said, I was producing so much, I still was making more than he was eating in a day every day.
Wow, that's amazing. It's actually really good.
Yeah, it was wild.
Yeah. Yeah. But the whole pump break thing, I mean, I didn't pump at all when I went back to work because I think I like was said before that I didn't produce enough.
Yeah.
But also another thing, this is my second kid. Like we tried to latch, she wouldn't latch. We found out actually she was tongue tied.
Oh, yeah.
We had to go and get like
The
her
release.
all. Yeah, they do like a little laser. Apparently,
Mm.
pediatric dentists can do it. So we took her
Oh,
to like a
cool.
whole different county and they do like a little laser thing. And they're like, we don't
Nice.
want you in the room. You'll hear her scream, but that's fine. And I'm like, what? And she was like screaming. And like, she didn't feel anything. I'm like, did she tell you that? Did
Right.
she tell you didn't feel anything?
Right.
So I
That's what
know.
the screams meant.
So I think one of my friends, she was like, I tried to like breastfeed and I couldn't. And they found out that he was also tongue tied.
Mhm.
So I think sometimes that can also be like a reason.
Yeah.
But
I mean, my kids were checked and they all said the pediatricians all said no, but who knows? That might have been an issue. I really have no idea.
I'm sure they're fine. But I didn't even know that was a thing till my friend told me when they couldn't produce. And
Yeah.
then when they told her she had tongue tie, I was like, she's like, go to the pediatric dentist. Don't go to this other thing. She's like, they cut it with the scalpel and he was bleeding for months. I was like, oh my God. I was like,
Yeah.
months?
Right. Yeah. And then
Girl.
the first time I saw a lactation consultant was when I had thrush. So it was like really hard and challenging. And I was like, I mean, I was struggling with postpartum depression also. So I was like in her office crying about like, I hate breastfeeding and like, I don't want to say I hate it. I almost hate it. Like I like couldn't even admit that I hated it. And, um, and I was kind of like, I'm open to having a better experience, but I had a terrible experience last time and I'm not having a good experience now. And so like I kind of want to learn how to have a better experience, but also I plan to stop soon. And she just like gave me ways to wean and I kind of felt like, okay, so we're not gonna have a better experience. We're just gonna quit.
Well, did you have any anxiety with your depression or was just depression for you?
I had a lot of intrusive thoughts. Like I remember one time I had my baby in the little like swaddle and I was walking in our kitchen and I had a candle lit on the counter and I was like, "Oh my God, what if the baby catches on fire?" And then like like that thought goes in and then it's like a movie in my mind and it plays out like and I see all of this like vivid terrible detail of like what would happen and I still like it still happens to me now. We've got like free weights in our house and I'm like, "Oh my God, what if we dropped a kettlebell on the one of our kids and crushed their skull?" Right? And I'm just like, of course that's not what's going to happen, but like these are what's popping into my head and then you like have these pictures of what your child would look like if they were crushed to death with a kettlebell and you're like, cool, that's fun.
I think mine, even right now, mine is her being kidnapped, which is like I mean, I don't know why. It's like all the time I think that. It's like
Yeah.
crazy. I'm like, we're gonna go somewhere. And I tell like my husband, like, hold on to both the kids. Make sure, and I got actually a shoe insert for my son that has an air tag in it. So we can
Nice.
tell him.
Yeah.
Like everyone's like, that's great. I'm like, yeah, but it's like normal. I don't know. Like
Yeah.
little bits of it left. So I totally get the thoughts kind of still coming on.
Yeah, it's terrible. I mean, I would say I was predominated more by depression than anxiety and like just the same issues I had the first time. I didn't feel the connection. I didn't feel like we were bonding. Um, I didn't, I just felt sad. Um, And so,
That. Yeah. I mean, do you feel like you were more prepared the second time now that you kind of knew what you were kind of up against?
I don't like, so because I had the same sort of postpartum depression issues the first time, I did make sure I had a therapist like lined up while I was pregnant so that I could have somebody to talk to when I was postpartum. And at first, like, I mean, I kind of had the same sort of experience. Like in the very beginning, when we were still in the hospital, I still kind of like oxytocin, pitocin high. Like everything was like, oh, it's happening. It's fine. I have no stress. Um, and then when we got home, it was like, okay, for a couple of days. And then like I don't know, I just started to get exhausted and um, still the same struggle with breastfeeding. I still didn't feel super connected to him. And then like I also had a toddler. So um like all of that is very exhausting. And I felt for a while like, oh, I am doing better this time, like knowing what to expect, I'm doing better. But then as time went on, it was like, I'm not doing well. Um, so I ended up having kind of like the same issues and the same stuff happen, which was kind of frustrating because it was like, okay, I thought this might happen. I knew what to expect and like I thought it could be better and it's still not super better.
How long did it take you, I guess, the first time to figure out that's what was happening and that you needed a therapist?
I mean, probably a couple of weeks, honestly. Like I started to feel like overwhelming sadness and like like I was preventing myself from crying constantly. Like I felt like I was just constantly holding in tears like in the first couple of weeks with my first son and I had read about like baby blues versus postpartum depression and I was like maybe it's just baby blues. Maybe it's just baby blues and then it was just like okay, it's not getting better. I should probably do something about this.
Okay. Okay. Did they ever have a questionnaire for you or anything before you left the hospital or?
Yeah, they did one and it was like that one was fine. They also did one at my son's pediatrician the first time, and that's the first time somebody talked to me. They had a social worker come talk to me at one of my older son's, excuse me, pediatrician appointments, and which was kind of funny because the pediatrician was like, I'm gonna go and leave this lady in here with you." Okay, bye.
I'm here just to check milestones and
Yeah.
that's about it.
Yeah, and I got the impression that he was kind of like, you're the first person who's answered these questions this way, and I don't know what to do about it. And also, I
Becky,
don't need
you're
to be
up.
here. Yeah, like I don't need to be here, so bye-bye.
He's like, Becky, we've been had you back there for many months. It's your
Yeah.
time to shine, girl. Get
Yeah,
in there.
right. Somebody finally wants to talk to you. Um, yeah.
Goodness. Well,
And
as far
this
as, oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say the second time I think they did that, but I can't remember if um I don't know if I talked to somebody at, they definitely had the same, it was the same pediatrician, so they had the same questionnaire, but I'm not sure, I can't remember if somebody talked to me at the one with my second son. But I was
So
like, yeah, my mood is terrible. And they were like, this score is not what we want to see. And I was like, well, that's too bad.
I remember one of them was like, do you still laugh at things? And I'm like,
Right. Do you
I
laugh as
can't laugh
often
at
as you used
anything
to?
right now.
How about fucking no? I don't.
I'm so tired.
Yeah.
Laughter is not on my list of
Yeah.
things I need right now.
Yeah. I would slap you if I had the energy.
Yeah, exactly.
Like,
So as
get
far as
it
like
out
with
of
your
here.
second, you have your older child at home. Obviously, they can't come to the hospital. You had the COVID restrictions. Like, how did you guys kind of handle that? Like, did you have
I,
family?
no, so my father-in-law came and watched my son when when we were in the hospital giving birth, and then he left the day after we got home from the hospital in the morning. And so he wasn't there very long. He was there, like half a day with us basically after we got out of the hospital. Um, and then it was just me and my husband. And so it was a lot. My son actually, we had changed daycare. So when I first, he wasn't in daycare, like right around the time other son was born, but he got into daycare, I think like 3 days after
Mhm.
my son was born. So then that was really helpful so my husband could drop him off in the morning and he could be occupied all day. And like we could kind of get in the rhythm with the newborn
Right.
and then just have to like, pick up the toddler at the end of the day, get through a couple hours and then be like, okay, well, we got him down. Now we just got to deal with a newborn who needs constant attention, So,
Daycare is
um,
amazing to have for them to go to all day. I remember like my dad was like, listen, it's really expensive. Like I was like, no, the
I
best money
mean,
spent. We need
yeah,
him to go somewhere for the day. Like,
yeah. And honestly, after seeing all the stuff they do with them, I'm like, yeah, you're way better suited than me. I'm not.
like sending pictures and painting rocks and stuff. I'm like, I don't have
Yeah.
time for that.
Yeah.
Like,
And,
we need to get
yeah, like,
flat rocks.
right. And like I would remember like I've seen some of the stuff they do and I'm like, that looks cool, but I don't want to clean that up.
Yeah, no.
So I'm so glad that you do that there.
Yeah, and like she was born in the summertime, so like they were taking him to the pool all the time, and I was like, "That's great. He can swim it out. Just go."
Oh my God. I will say, I do think like I was pregnant in the heat of summer the first time, and I was postpartum in the heat of summer the second time. And that is way worse because like your body feels super weird because you just had a human come out of it. And
Yeah,
like none of your clothes fit you well. Like the maternity clothes don't fit very well. Your regular clothes don't fit you well. And it's hot outside. Like you just want me to go sweat out there? No, thank you.
and like they want you to be topless, so
Yeah, just all the time. It's a party. Yeah.
ma'am, no, I don't want to be
Hmm.
unclothed at
Yeah,
all.
I'm like, no, I'm not here for it. I'm sweaty enough anyway from like all my hormones fluctuating and somebody drinking all of the fluid out of my body. And then
Yeah.
you're like, it's only a 90% humidity. You'll be fine. Get out, take some steps, like
I think
exercise, get your baby outside. No.
get some vitamin D. That'll really help.
Right.
Like, no, ma'am.
Yeah, I mean, it would be helpful, except no, I won't be doing that.
I'm trying to think about someone kidnapping the child. Last thing I want to do is go
Right.
outside.
Yeah.
So I know for me the big thing was like visitors and stuff. Like, what do you think like first time versus second time you change for yourself that you feel
I mean,
helped?
nothing. We didn't really have it. Like the first time was COVID, so nobody wanted to come. Like it was 2020, so nobody wanted to travel or do anything. And the second time we didn't really have to set strict boundaries. I feel like we didn't have very many people that lived super close that wanted to come see. Like our um like the grandparents and stuff wanted to come. And so they all like scheduled their time and came when they came and like that part was fine. We really weren't overwhelmed with visitors or entertaining people or any of that. Um, and it was kind of nice to like have time to figure out how to be a family of four together.
Yeah. Now, how was your older son with the baby?
Oh my God, it was hysterical so we actually got home from the hospital and they weren't home. My father-in-law had taken him out on a walk and they were still out when we got back from the hospital.
Mhm.
So he was super excited that we were home and he came running up the stairs and he was very attached to me. So we said like, okay, my husband needs to be holding the newborn because he's going to freak out if he sees me and I can't like, and I'm holding some other child. Um, and so he came running up and then he was like, hey, what is that thing? And so he was like very curious, like, can I get close to it? Is it safe? I don't know. Um,
Aw.
and he was pretty cool. The thing that actually upset him the most was I couldn't pick him up at first. So like when I was still healing in the first week, I couldn't pick him up, and that was very upsetting to him, and he didn't really understand why. But as far as his interest in the newborn, he thought he was very cool and interesting, but then he would be like, "Oh, this thing doesn't do anything, so never mind." He's like, "Oh, hi, baby. Okay, you're boring. I'm gonna go do something else now."
Did both of your kids sleep well at night, or did you see a difference like in them?
Mhm. They're both pretty good sleepers, which is
Oh no.
honestly really helpful. I think, excuse me. I personally think part of it is their gigantic heads. I feel like there was so much brain up there taking up like so much metabolic activity that their bodies were like, just cut it off. We can't
Go to sleep.
we cannot be awake anymore. There's too much to process in here. And we were diligent. We did a method where we tried to keep them on a routine and make sure that they were getting fed at specific intervals, to make sure that they were fed enough so that like they would have a more established routine and help them get to where they were able to like sleep well at night and on their own and that sort of thing, which really worked for us because like not sleeping I can't do it.
Yeah, that's the difference now is like my little one, she does not sleep. Well, now she's doing much better. I think she's teething. So some of her teeth
Ugh,
came.
terrible.
Oh my gosh, it's horrible.
Oh,
And like she's so different because my son would eat everything. She doesn't want to eat anything.
where's my younger one is like, food? Yeah, I'll try it.
So she'll eat food, but she won't eat purees. It's like I tried to start her with purees and she's like,
Mm.
"Bleh." I'm like, I just like made all this stuff and I watched these videos on how to make it.
Yeah.
Just spit it out over here. I make them into weird pancakes for my other kid.
Great.
You know, he's like, why are these like broccoli zucchini pancakes? Why are they green? I'm like, they're Hulk
No-
pancakes. Eat them.
Nobody asked you.
I'm like, Hulk eats these pancakes. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, he's gonna be big and strong.
So I have to give her like food now. So little pieces of pizza. Like,
Nice.
it's crazy. It's just weird. Yeah. I don't know. They're different, but
Yeah, for sure. And it is a totally different ballgame bringing a second child home to a toddler. I feel like you think like, oh, it'll be twice as hard because there's twice as many humans, and it's like, I don't know, 25,000 times as hard.
you
But
know,
that's fine.
when we got home, I didn't realize how big my son was. And I mean, I didn't realize how grown up he was till I had the baby next to him.
Yeah.
I think that made me a little teary-eyed. I was like, I didn't realize he'd grown up so much. And when you bring the baby home, you're like, God, he's a really big kid.
That's adorable.
Right. So, well, it's been good though. Anything else that I, didn't cover or didn't get to ask you that you'd like to kind of share?
I think those are most of the highlights.
Nice.
I think
Nice.
that's it.
Thanks for letting me be on the other side.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate it.
Of course, anytime.
All righty, my dear.
Thank you for listening to Postpartum Unfiltered.
If you enjoyed the show, please like, share, comment, or leave a review.
You can follow us on Instagram at postpartum.unfiltered.
If you feel called to share your postpartum experience, please contact us on Instagram or at drjilliancampbell.com.